Doug. Say, something happened in our paperwork, and we missed a couple of my guests. And I'd like to have Marie Miko stand up. Marie is the Edina resident, a friend of mine. She's a lead designer at Gabbard's, and she's a friend of our speaker, Lee Anderson's and John Allen's. Good friend of mine, Brian Mark, RBC Tile. Just a great guy and been a friend for a long time, and went to high school with my wife. So Brian, thanks for coming. John Allen joined our club in 1992 and was sponsored by Jim Perkins. John's classification is commercial real estate, and he is president and owner of Industrial Equities, a Minneapolis-based full-service commercial real estate development, investment, and management company. John is married to my sister-in-law, Becky, and together their 5 children. They moved to Naples, Florida in 2001. Florida is his home during the school year, and Gull Lake and Nisswa is during the summer months. John serves on many boards in Florida, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Currently he is the chair of the community school in Naples, and he is a member of the University of St. Thomas Board of Trustees in St. Paul, among others. John was recently the recipient of the 2013 John F. Cade Entrepreneur of the Year Award from the University of St. Thomas and past recipient of the NC Little Hospice Man of the Year Award. John?
Before I get into my introduction, the walk down memory lane rekindled a moment in 1994 or 5 when I was at a board of directors meeting with Mike Norman and Bobby Hildreth, and one of the older members looked at me and said, "John, don't you think we're getting enough women in this club?" I looked at Bobby, I looked at Mike, I said, "I've never been in a club with enough women." Our speaker today, Lee R. Anderson, is a long-term Edina resident. Yay. A Breck School alumni, a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point, a veteran and nationally recognized philanthropist in children's health, higher education, and interest of military veterans, and the CEO and owner of API Group, which is a privately held, internationally connected, diversified construction, fire protection conglomerate of over 40 companies and 9,000 employees. Because of Lee's biggest business acumen and uncommon charitable contribution, Lee has accumulated more awards and recognition than John Barnett in Edina Alarm has monitoring contracts. Let me share a few recent ones. I'm not going back too far. He recently received the Ernst & Young National Entrepreneur of the Year Award, national, in real estate, construction, and hospitality. The John F. Cady Award, the St. Thomas School of Business Entrepreneur of the Year. He's been inducted in the Minnesota Business Hall of Fame already. He's received the Professional Achievement Award from the University of Moorhead, and he's been the recipient of the Joseph Labovitz Entrepreneurial Success and a Lifetime Achievement Award. That's just in business. In philanthropy, he was honored this spring an award that meant very much to him as the Distinguished Alumni and Graduate Award of West Point, the highest possible honor West Point awards to a graduate. He's been awarded the National Catholic Educational Association St. Elizabeth Seton Award. He's been awarded the Outstanding Philanthropist in the Minnesota Award. He's been a Donor of the Year for the National Association of Athletic Directors. Lee's keen interest in the welfare and of military veterans in general and their employment opportunities in particular led him to fund and provide leadership for Hiring Our Heroes, a nationwide initiative to facilitate hiring of wounded service members and other veterans to re-enter the workforce. Lee's personal interests include big game hunting, collecting and driving and winning awards with antique cars and boats, a winery in Croatia. Lee is not all work. He enjoys friends and a good vodka. As you can imagine, with his busy schedule, his emails are very short. I received one recently. It said, "Lonely and parched on the shores of Nisswa." So I had to go visit him. Some of you have commented that Lee and I have some similarities, boats and cars and construction. And so I like to say and dissuade people from that we're all that similar. I used the vernacular for the older people here of the TV program Bonanza. And in that vernacular, I always say, Lee is Ben Cartwright and lives in the Ponderosa, and I am Hop Singh, living in the back cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, a man large in stature, commitment to his community, success in business, and a native of Edina, Lee Anderson.
Thanks, John. Don't need that. Can you hear me? All right, good. Can you see me? That's even better. I'm reminded by John that, yes, although I don't live in Minnesota or Minneapolis anymore, I am an Edina resident and lived in Edina since I was a young boy. I did not go to Edina High School. I went to brick school, but my wife went to Edina, and we were married in Edina. We came back and lived in Edina, and after, well, let's see, it would have been like 25 years of that, I said, are we going to die in Edina? Now, I understand what it is to be from Edina, because I spent many, many years there, and we decided, let's try something different. So we bought a home down in Kenwood, just close to Lake of the Isles, and we lived there for a number of years, and then we moved to Florida, which is now our residence. But we come back in the summertime and enjoy the Gull Lake area, and with Brian and John and Steve and some of you others. It was interesting, as I walked in here today, I really didn't expect to know anybody, and there's Bob Perkins, for goodness sakes. I walked in here, the first 10 people that walked in, I knew them all. I said, oh, this is really a surprise. Well, some of them came to hear me, I guess. So anyway, I'm very glad to be here. Now, what I'm going to do is, Aaron says, don't be moving around because we taped this thing. It's going to be hard for me because I'm kind of a dynamic guy. I do like to move around a little bit. Just give you a little bit of history about how I grew up, a little bit about the business, my philosophy relative to leadership, and then I'm going to end up with a short discussion about what John mentioned, hiring our heroes, which of course are veterans from all services. If my kids were here, they would say something about growing up Anderson, and I wasn't sure what that meant, and I finally figured out they thought I was really a strict dad. And but listen, they didn't have a strict dad. I had a strict dad. I was an only child. In my family, if your mother made something, you ate it. It was irrelative as to whether you liked it or not. It was never anything like, try it, see if you like it. You ate it. If you didn't eat it that night, you got it for breakfast the next morning. I loved my dad. Unfortunately, I lost him when I was 40 years old, but he's been my inspiration. He had an 8th grade education, and in those days he was born of Swedish immigrants over Payne Avenue and Orange Street in East St. Paul. Used to be called Snooze Boulevard. Some of you old guys have heard of that. And what happened in the old days, if your parents died, which my dad's did, and when he was 14, then you moved in with the neighbors. And as old Swedish custom, I think it's done elsewhere, my grandmother from Sweden had 23 brothers and sisters. Oh, how is that possible? Well, there were 4 deaths, 4 remarriages, and that's how it happened. And eventually, a lot of those Swedish immigrants had to leave the house. There wasn't any more room. So we had a lot of Swedes come over here in the late 1800s and 1900s, of course. My dad had some really definite ideas about things. For instance, he was convinced that the office was a shrine, and you visited the shrine at least 6 days a week. He was convinced that God created the warehouse on a Saturday, and that was so young boys like Lee would have a place to work. And I suggested, Dad, why Saturday? He says, well, God is all-knowing. He says if you'd done it on Tuesday and Wednesday, you'd be in school. and you wouldn't have an opportunity to go there and work. I said, oh, well, that makes sense. So I worked in the warehouse. He was a great guy. He was also 6'6", and he was a plumber. That was his trade, and he told me as a young boy, he said, well, there's two things you have to do. He said, he happened to be a Mason. He said, you have to belong to a fraternal organization, like Rotary. But he said, in that case, that would be the Masons. That's what I belong to. And you have to have a trade. He says, you know, if everything goes to hell, he says, you can always fall back and work with your hands. And he said, of course, that would be a plumber. So I set about to do both, and I did both. I'm a licensed Minnesota plumber, but don't call me. After I was married, all my friends heard that, and I put in more garbage disposals than I even want to think about, but I don't do it anymore. Growing up in Edina, I was a good student and a good athlete, so I had an opportunity to go to a number of schools out east. And one day, along about March of my graduating year, my dad said, have you given some thought about where you'd like to go to school? And I said, well, Dad, yeah, I have. He says, well, what are you thinking about? I said, well, you know, I think I'd like to go to Harvard. Been accepted there, play football and so forth. And he says, well, that's a pretty good choice. He said, but I've been giving it some thought. I says, oh, really? Yeah. He says, I think you're going to West Point. And I said, Dad, and I didn't apply to West Point. He said, well, I did. He said, I took care of that. And so I said, well, Dad, isn't there a physical exam that you have to take? And he said, throw a basketball or something. He says, yeah, there is. He said, and that's tomorrow at the Minneapolis Armory, and that's why I'm bringing it up today. I want to give you some chance to think about it. Well, my dad was always right. I was probably the most immature 18-year-old that ever grew up in Minnesota, unless one of you guys think of somebody else. But no, I was immature. I didn't. I wanted to go to college, but I wasn't thinking about working quite that hard. And we got into a bit of an argument. I never argued with my dad, and he stopped talking to me, and it was terrible. The first time in my whole life my dad wouldn't talk to me. So after about a week of this, I went to my mother and said, Mother, I said, Dad won't talk to me. Yeah. I said, well, what's the problem? He said, well, you know what the problem is. He wants you to go to West Point. So I said, well, okay. So I thought about it for a little bit, and then I went in and said, Dad, you're right, I'll go. Best thing I've ever done. The quality of the education is so far superior in my estimation. And I've had the opportunity in recent years to reconnect with West Point. I spend quite a bit of time out there. I'm involved in a number of activities, both from the alumni and the athletic departments and so forth. Just marvelous. So anyway, now fast forward, had a great career, 4 years at West Point, and now I'm in the military, and really enjoying the military. I'm single. I'm an officer. I'm doing all things. I've just been transferred to Europe, and my dad called and he said, I got some bad news. I said, what's that, Dad? He says, I've had a heart attack. He says, I'm okay. He said, but you know, it's time that you come home now and go to work. I said, well, Dad, he said, you won't believe this. He said, but that's kind of what I'm doing now. He said, no, I said, I mean, go to work as a plumber. See, my dad, that was really the only kind of work that was legitimate. He said, you've been doing that military enough. Now, I said, oh, Dad, I said, one more rotation, one more tour, and I said, I really wanted to go to Europe. And he said, no, you need to come home. If I can help you while I'm alive, I'll be here to do it, but with my heart now, you never know. So I always did what my dad said, not right away, but always ended up doing that. So I came home, and my dad had a partner in the plumbing business. And the next morning after I'm home, and we go in, sit down in the partner's office, and his name was Tony Cherney. He's still alive, incidentally, and 98 years old. Dad says, well, Lee's home. Yeah, Tony says, I see that, you know. He said, well, he says, I was thinking that we should get him in the business. And Tony said to my dad, he said, well, Reuben, he said, you know, we've never talked about this. And quite frankly, I don't want any partners in the business. And when you retire, I intend to retire and liquidate the entire business. So I look at my dad and I said, Dad, you mean you didn't talk to Tony about this? He said, well, I didn't think it would be a problem. Well, anyway, I'm going to go a little bit faster because I got a lot of things to talk about. My dad had another business over in St. Paul. It was an insulation contracting company called Asbestos Products. Can you imagine? Asbestos Products. So he said, why don't you go over there for a couple weeks and see what it's like? And I said, oh, I'd be happy to do that. They had 13 employees, and the net worth of the company was $60,000. Very small company, 710 Raymond Avenue. I'll remember it forever. So I'm over there. First 2 months, I'm trying to find out what I should do, and the president there said, well, you should be in sales. I said, okay, you know, so I got this list of asbestos-contained materials, and I'm going around trying to sell these things. After 2 months, one day, I'm asking the president, John Anderson, happened to be his name, so many questions. He took his pencil box and he threw it up against the wall, and the pencils everywhere, you know. And he says, I quit. He said, you asked too many questions, and he said, you run the damn thing. And I suspect you will anyway. So he was right. I called my dad. I said, Dad, you know, John Anderson just quit. My dad says, well, then you run the damn thing. I says, okay. And next June, I celebrate 50 years with the company. So it's been a marvelous run. We went from a very small company, doing maybe 200,000 in sales. We're $2 billion in sales now. And with a lot of great people, like John said, we have 9,000 employees. We're the largest fire protection, alarm and detection company and security company, but not so much security, in North America, with 160 offices, with offices in the UK and Macau, China, and some other places, but not really an international company as such, just a North American company. And how did we do that in 50 years? Well, the first 15 years, we worked hard to make a little profit, and we didn't have a lot of capital, so there wasn't really much we could do in the way of acquisitions and so forth. But in 1968, we made our first little acquisition, mainly because the company we were joint venturing with, the owner died unexpectedly, and we found ourselves with this company. And so we said, well, we'll just buy it. It was a small deal, but that was our first deal. Over the years, we've probably made 80 acquisitions. We tend to make 6 to 10 a year. Sometimes they're big. Last year we made our largest, 150 million cost us. That's a big deal. Most of our deals are much smaller than that. In fire protection, with all these offices, we like to find small family companies that sell, and maybe they're doing 4 to 10 or 20 million or something like that, and then we just branch them to one of our larger companies. We call them bolt-ons. Some people call them tuck-unders and so forth, but it's marvelous because we can eliminate the overhead and pretty much add the sales, and the earnings pretty much drop to the bottom. So didn't come up with that, but it's a great idea. Success in business. I've got one rule, which I'll share with you. We always look for value added. We can look at a lot of deals, but if I can't figure out how we can add value, I mean, 1 + 1 = 3, right, Bob? You're an accountant. Always look at that. And we have to look at the culture, because culture is really important. As big as we are, we still consider ourselves a family of companies. Nobody leaves our company. In 1985, I sold a third of my stock to an ESOP. We have, last time I checked, we have over 50 millionaires in the company, just with the company stock, and I'm very proud of that. We're a high performance company. We've averaged better than 20% return on equity for over 30 years. So it's marvelous how that has happened. And we continue to grow, and naturally we're looking for more opportunities. I've been a great believer in paradigm shifts. 15, 20 years ago, I was reading that more people were going to move to the mountain states. Over the next few years, some states have had zero growth. Mountain states have had better than 10% for a long, long time now. And I said, you know, we're not represented there. We need to get into these mountain states with fire protection and so forth. And we've added 15 branches throughout from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, down to Tucson, Arizona, and everywhere in between and so forth. Great idea. Recently, we're all aware of the gas and oil, call it G&O, industry. Unbelievable. In my life, I never thought I'd see a gold rush. It's like 1849 all over. If you haven't been up to western North Dakota, you wouldn't believe it. 40,000 transient workers are working up there, working out of man camps, out of pickup trucks that they're living in, and so forth and so on. We started acquiring companies in oil production about 5 or 6 years ago, and we've bought 5 of them so far. We're one of the largest remediation pipeline constructors, and by that I would explain that oil is very corrosive and it wears out the wall thicknesses of the pipelines and so forth. So right now, Canada and the U.S. have a big problem with pipelines wearing too thin, and so the work is just unbelievable. A few months ago, we bought another company up in Thunder Bay, Canada, doing the same thing that we do, just in remediation. We have a company down in Great Bend, Kansas, is one of the largest pipeline layers. I talk about midstream, not the XL pipeline. That would be mainstream, but midstream, so forth. So anyway, another idea that I had, just because I could see oil and gas was going to be the big thing, and it will. Let me talk a little bit about business philosophy. We look for strong leaders, and we have several programs. John mentioned our interest in hiring veterans. We are a veteran preference company. We hired 80% of our hires these days are veterans. Not by accident, it's because we go out and hire veterans, because I'm committed to getting some of these guys and girls and spouses to work. And 2 years ago, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which I've been very involved in, I made a commitment to them to sponsor financially for 5 years, Hire Our Heroes program. And you perhaps have seen them on television, but we made a commitment to hire 500,000 veterans. Not just me. I'm talking about Capital One, General Electric, Ford Motor, and hundreds of other companies besides ourselves. And every one of us have been working diligently. I go and speak about hiring our heroes wherever I'm asked to go. It's one of the most rewarding things that I've done, quite frankly. Partly because I am a veteran, but just mostly because I'm an American. And I think it's a shame. We've got 850,000 veterans looking for work in this country and having a darn tough time finding. Now, part of the problem is that you have a job description and you want to go out and find a guy that fits your job description. Well, you're not going to find Douglas MacArthur out there looking for a job. You're going to find Bill Jones from somewhere who went into the service out of high school, and he's been in the service for 5 years. He's learned some skills there, but now he's back in the job market. Only now he's 23, 24, 25 years old, and he can't find a job. And I'm most interested in getting these guys to work. Now, we have a Minnesota Job Fair coming up August 1st. It'll be down at the Twin City Federal Stadium and so forth. We will have over 100 corporations represented there with kiosks and tables and so forth. My company will be represented. Am I talking too loud? Too long? And I hope to hire maybe 20 guys out of that group, and we'll do it. Last year, our company hired 210 veterans. Every member company of our group is required to hire people and give them the training that they need, relocation, whatever it takes. If I've got a guy who says, I don't have a suit, I'll buy you a suit. I don't have transportation, I'll send a cab. We'll pay for that. We will retrain you. You want me to hurry up? No.
No, keep going.
Okay.
Keep going.
All right. Because I'm getting close now.
Okay.
All right. To get these guys on their feet. Now, one of the statistics that I hate to even talk about, but I will, is the high suicide rate of veterans. But I'm convinced, I know all about post-traumatic stress. I've read a lot about it. I know it exists. But I also know what it would be like. I've never not had a job, so I can't honestly say I've never been able to get a job. But I can imagine coming back from Afghanistan, Iraq, and so forth, possibly with traumatic stress, filling out 100 job applications and never getting one call back, not a one. Is it surprising to anybody that these guys commit suicide? I mean, how depressed can you get? You're trying to provide for your family and your children, and nobody will give you a job because they say you don't fit the description. Well, it's up to us, and if I'm successful at all, one of you guys will go out, and the next hire you make will be a veteran or a spouse of a veteran, and I'll feel good about that. In closing, I would just mention, getting back to the leadership aspects and so forth of our business. We have a program where we hire most of them are military officers, but some are enlisted men and so forth that are rotating out of the military into civilian life, and we go to all of the headhunting organizations like Lucas and Orion, and there's a number of them. They just represent service people and we travel to San Diego and San Antonio. The people that we have in those areas do that, and it's a marvelous place to find talent. These guys have skills. They may not have the exact skill you want, but they have skills of leadership. They have skills of responsibility. After all, they had to get up every morning at 6:30 and get dressed and get shaved and in the military and so forth, and that's responsibility. A lot of kids today can't even get out of bed. I'm smiling because I'm thinking of some of my grandchildren. But we know that to be the truth. So no, they have got skills. So we have over 22 Service Academy veterans working in our company now, and they are the future of our company. And it's not just because they went to Service Academy, although I'm very big on that because of the training involved and so forth. But they are the future. And then very shortly, we have one other program called a veteran rotational program, where we will hire people who are not necessarily officers, most of them enlisted, and we talk to the Minnesota National Guard and various reserve units here in Minnesota, and we will bring them in for 1 year. They're full employees of the company, subject to all the benefits and so forth. But it is 1 year in which they can decide whether they want to stay with the company or whether we want them to stay with the company, quite frankly. And that has been extremely, because a lot of these people, they're 20s and so forth, they really don't know what they want to do. And this gives them a year to decide what that is. Well, I could talk for a long time, and I don't want to do that. The history report, I get equal time to that, though, right? It's been really great. A marvelous organization, Rotarians. You do so much good work around the world, and I'm very privileged to be here. Thank you, Steve, for inviting me, and enjoy the summer, everybody.
Thank you very much, Lee. We certainly enjoyed hearing all about your life, and it's been a very exciting experience for you, and sharing with us. We appreciate it. And also your recent commitment to veterans is something we all very much share with you as well. So
Thank you.
We appreciate that. And in your honor, Lee Anderson, we're going to make a contribution to polio.
Wonderful.
And we have, those of us that are over 60 remember when the Salk vaccine became widely available in 1957, and that created the eradication in this country and started that process, which Rotary got behind in 1985. So we're very important, and those of us that, as I said, are over 60 remember the horrible polio years, where 500,000 people in the 40s and 50s around the world were struck down, either died or had paralysis.
Yes.
So,
well, thank you.
In your honor, we're going to make a gift to polio eradication.
Thank you very much, Keith. All right, thank you.
Lee, thank you so much. I can't think of a better speaker for my first meeting as president. I know you drove down here especially for this from Brainerd today, so I appreciate that very much. Polly, thank you for coming today. Visiting Rotarians and guests, thanks for coming to my first meeting. As you go about your day, engage Rotary to change lives. Meeting adjourned.